Have you ever been completely certain about something only to realize later that you were totally wrong? Think about how many times your eyes and mind have convinced you of something only for the truth to surprise you later. Let me take you back to a moment that shifted my perspective. One afternoon, I was walking through a park. It was one of those perfect days, clear skies, the sound of kids laughing, and the soft breeze rustling through the trees. I passed a man sitting on a bench, head down, shoulders slumped, staring at the ground. He looked lost, the kind of look that immediately made me think he must be going through something really tough. Without thinking much, I felt sorry for him. I walked by, my mind making up all kinds of stories about what might be wrong in his life. Maybe he'd lost his job. Maybe he'd had a fight with someone he cared about. I felt like I understood his situation just from that brief glance. But a few minutes later, I looped back around and passed him again. This time, I saw him differently. He had stood up, and in his hand, he held a book. Not just any book, it was a children's storybook. Then, right in front of me, a little girl ran up to him, arms wide open, giggling, and he lifted her into his arms, smiling the biggest smile I'd ever seen. In that moment, everything I assumed about him, everything I thought I knew was wrong. It made me think, how many times do we do this in life? How many times do we look at a situation or a person and think we've got it all figured out, only to find out later that we've barely scratched the surface? The truth is, what we see isn't always the reality. It's just a piece of it, one snapshot in time, one angle of a much bigger picture. So let me ask you, how often do you make snap judgments? How often do we, without even realizing it, create entire stories in our minds based on what we think we see? We all do it, and that's why today, I want to challenge you to take a step back. I want to invite you to explore a different way of thinking, to go beyond first impressions, to question the surface, and to realize that the truth often hides in places we least expect. In the next few minutes, we're going to dive into how our minds, our assumptions, and even the world around us can shape a reality that's far from the truth. Together, we'll learn how to look deeper and see the world and each other in a whole new way. Here's something fascinating. Our brains are wired to fill in gaps. When we see something, especially if it's incomplete or unfamiliar, we automatically create a story to make sense of it. But those stories aren't always true. Think about an optical illusion. Have you ever looked at one and seen two completely different things? Like the famous image of the vase that, when you look again, turns into two faces. What's real? Is it a vase or two faces? The answer depends entirely on your perspective. It's a reminder that our minds don't always give us the full picture. They give us what we expect to see or what we want to see. Now, let's take this beyond illusions. In real life, this happens all the time. We make quick judgments based on the limited information we have, and our brain fills in the blanks. Sometimes these assumptions are harmless, but other times, they can lead to misunderstandings, conflicts, and even hurt feelings. I remember once meeting someone at a gathering. They seemed distant, hardly smiled, and kept to themselves. My immediate thought was, they're rude. I figured they weren't interested in connecting with anyone, but later I learned they had just lost someone close to them, and they were trying to hold it together in public. I was looking at them from my perspective, but I didn't know what was really going on. The truth is, we rarely know the full story. What we see is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle, and most of the time, that piece is colored by our own biases, experiences, and assumptions. Think about the last time you made an assumption about someone, a coworker, a friend, or even a stranger? What were you basing it on? A facial expression? A quick interaction? How might your perspective have been wrong? And more importantly, how might the truth have been something entirely different? So, how do we break free from these surface level assumptions? In the next part, we're going to explore how what we see in the media, especially on social platforms, can be a huge source of misinformation and distorted reality. It's all about learning to look deeper and think more critically. In today's world, much of what we see isn't experienced directly. It comes from what we consume on screens, social media, news outlets, and even entertainment. But here's the thing, what we see online is often carefully curated, edited, and filtered. It's not the full picture. Let's talk about social media for a second. How many times have you scrolled through your feed, seeing people's perfect vacations, their seemingly flawless relationships, or their major career achievements? And have you ever caught yourself thinking, wow, they have it all together? But what we often forget is that we're only seeing the highlights. We see the best moments, the carefully chosen photos, the edited versions of their lives. We don't see the challenges, the failures, or the struggles that happen behind the scenes. Here's the danger. When we constantly compare our messy, unfiltered reality to someone else's polished online life, it's easy to feel inadequate. It's easy to believe that everyone else has it better or that we're falling behind. But the truth? What we're seeing is only one side of the story. It's the side they want to show us, and it's often far from the full truth. There's a story that went viral a few years ago about a social media influencer who posted glamorous travel photos, making it seem like she was living this incredible jet-setting lifestyle. But later, she admitted that many of those photos were staged. Some were even taken in her own neighborhood, carefully framed to make it look like she was halfway around the world. It looked real, but it wasn't. This is just one example of how easily we can be misled when we don't dig deeper into the stories we're being shown. The point is, whether it's on social media, in the news, or even in entertainment, what we see is often filtered through someone else's lens. And that lens might be distorted by their intentions, their biases, or their need to create a certain image. So the next time you're scrolling through your feed, watching the news, or even listening to a friend's story, ask yourself, is this the whole truth? What might I be missing? In the next part of this journey, we're going to take a closer look at how we can change our approach, how we can start looking beyond the surface and questioning the reality we're presented with. It's all about becoming more mindful and seeking out the truth that lies beneath. So now that we've explored how our minds, our assumptions, and even social media can distort the truth, let's talk about how we can change the way we see the world. Because here's the truth. What we see on the surface is rarely the full story. And the key to understanding reality is learning to look deeper. One of the most powerful habits you can develop is the ability to pause and ask yourself, what else might be going on here? Whether you're judging a situation, making assumptions about someone, or even consuming media, take a step back. Think critically. Ask yourself, is this really the full picture? What might I be missing? Is there a different perspective I haven't considered? This kind of reflection helps you see beyond the obvious. It helps you realize that the world isn't black and white. It's full of layers, complexity, and nuance. Take, for example, stories of success. We often hear about people achieving great things, getting their dream job, starting a business, or reaching a personal goal. It's easy to look at them and think, wow, they've got it all figured out. But what we don't always see are the countless failures they went through to get there. The sleepless nights, the moments of doubt, and the struggles they had to overcome. I remember reading about a famous author whose debut book became a bestseller. From the outside, it seemed like an overnight success. But what most people didn't know was that before that book got published, she had been rejected by dozens of publishers. Her success wasn't instant. It was years in the making, filled with frustration and perseverance. So when you see someone's success, or when you make a snap judgment about a situation, remind yourself that there's always more beneath the surface. Everyone has their own battles, their own challenges, their own truths that you may not be aware of. Instead of jumping to conclusions or accepting things at face value, take a moment to reflect. What's the bigger picture? How can I be more understanding, more compassionate, and more open to the idea that there's more going on than I can see? Here are a few ways you can start looking deeper. 1. Pause before judging. When you find yourself making an assumption about someone or something, pause. Ask yourself, do I really know what's going on here? Give yourself space to reconsider. 2. Ask questions. Whether it's in a conversation with a friend or something you see in the media, don't be afraid to ask questions. Seek clarity instead of assuming you know the full story. 3. Practice empathy. Remember that everyone has their own struggles. When you approach life with empathy, you're less likely to judge and more likely to understand the hidden truths behind people's actions. 4. Be curious, not certain. Adopt a mindset of curiosity rather than certainty. When you stay open to learning and seeing things from different perspectives, you open yourself up to deeper truths. The world is full of stories, moments, and people that are more complex than they first appear. What we see is often just a snapshot, a brief glimpse of a much larger reality. By being more mindful, more curious, and more compassionate, we can begin to uncover the truths that lie beneath the surface. Because at the end of the day, what we see isn't always the truth. But when we choose to look deeper, to ask questions, and to seek understanding, we come closer to the reality that connects us all. So as you go about your day, I challenge you to look beyond the surface. In your interactions, in your judgments, and in what you consume, ask yourself, what's the bigger story here? By doing this, you'll not only see the world more clearly, but you'll also become a more understanding and thoughtful version of yourself. Pause, reflect, look deeper. The truth is waiting to be seen.